Okay, everybody. Let's get underway. Once again, just one little bit of housekeeping. Geneviève, if you want to come up and tell what's possible for some of the special people in the room.
Everybody is special, Kevin. I don't know what you were alluding to, but whatever. There's numerous different kind of events that all of you have to go to. One of them that I was having questions about, and you will know if you're sort of, having to go to this event, is something that's going to take place today at 5:30 at the PwC offices. So the address is 18 York Street. It is a very short walk, probably 2 blocks this way, 3 that way towards the water, or it's a $6 cab ride, which I just took. So when you get to the 18 York building, you just go straight to the 26th floor, and there'll be people there to, they'll be able to assist you. Okay, thanks.
And the rest of us should just bust the doors down and go anyway. Right? Okay, our next panel is going to circle around something that we've heard a lot of already today, and that's the issue of caregiver burnout and just what kind of burden that is. I think at times often we can forget that we need to provide love and support and encouragement to the caregivers, as much as we do for the injured members of our own families. So to moderate this panel and her panelists, please join me in welcoming Rachel O'Hearn, the Executive Director of Returning Heroes Home.
Thanks, Kevin, and thank you, everyone, for being here this afternoon. You're making it to the finish line, and I appreciate your attention and your presence. And thanks to the True Patriot Love team for inviting me and for picking, I think, some really compelling conversation topics. So I'm excited to get into that. My name is Rachel O'Hearn. I'm from Texas. This is my first time in Canada. I'm a fan so far. I hear, lots of Texans. I hear a lot of myself in some of the panels earlier today and kind of throughout all of these discussions. I married an infantry officer in 2009, West Point graduate. It all briefed very well. It looked lovely. He deployed with the 101st to Kandahar, Afghanistan, so they actually took over, I believe, for a Canadian unit and had British soldiers to the south in Helmand in 2010. And then New Year's Eve of 2010, I got a phone call that he had been injured, and I needed to hop on a plane to Landstuhl, Germany. And it kind of went crazy from there. So he's a triple amputee. He walks every day. He's amazing. But I think caregiver fatigue is kind of can be 2 different things, right? You have that acute stage where we're in the hospital, everything was crazy, my mom was doing my laundry, I don't know who was cleaning the hotel room, it was not me. He would go to therapy, and I would go to, it's called the Warrior and Family Support Center on Fort Sam Houston in Texas, and I would read for an hour while he was in therapy, and that was my only non-fluorescent air, at the time. So there's kind of that acute stage, and then there was and I think we've heard a lot about this today as well, kind of the multi-year plan, kind of to see how things unfold. So because I make really great life choices, I went back to grad school in August after he was injured in January, and we also got a puppy. It is as ridiculous as it sounds. So this dog's getting up every 2 hours. Larkin's still not, doing a lot of wound care and medication management on his own, and I've got all these papers due, and I look up at one point that fall, and I'm crying, and I have Diet Coke and Greek yogurt with chocolate chips and sugar-free cherry jam, because this is how I'm going to keep, the calorie count under control, obviously. And I was like, man, this is not sustainable. We got to figure something out. So we're going to talk about some different strategies for how to handle some of these things that don't involve chocolate chips, although, when it is appropriate, chocolate chips are always a good option. So that's kind of my story and how I came to be here. I'm going to let the rest of y'all introduce yourselves, and then we'll get into the discussion. Karen.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here today, and thank you for sharing your story. My story is very similar in that phone call and having to get onto a plane to Landstuhl, and then taking it from there. We went a little bit crazy, I think, after the injury, in that we were given about 2 years that Simon was going to, my husband Simon at the time, my boyfriend, was going to recover. And then 6 months later, he was on to his next job, following the Governor General on international trips. So we didn't take a lot of time after his injury to process what was going on. And so it's been with the Invictus Games over the last 2 years that we've really started to reflect what that initial injury has meant for our lives over the last decade and what it means going forward. And so that's what I'm here to talk about today.
Thanks. Scott.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Murray. I'm VP Health for a company called Calian. Calian's been around for about 35 years, and for most, if not all of those years, we've been doing something to support the Department of National Defense. That something ranges from IT services to vehicle maintenance to fire suppression systems to virtual training of soldiers before deployment to health support services. So we have a pretty eclectic bucket of things that we do with that company called Calian. The health services is something that we've done for the last 13 years. It involves us basically supplementing the clinicians in uniform at all 32 bases across Canada. We do that with over 500 odd bodies at any given time in over 60 different categories of health. I don't even know if I could list all 60, but doctors, nurses, pharmacy, physio, you name it, we have it. And so through those experiences, as well as the fact that Calian tends to hire a fair number of veterans, I think we've garnered a pretty unique perspective, not only on the military healthcare system, but as well how the military families interact.
Julie.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here today. It's an honor. My name is Julie Turcotte. I come from Ottawa Public Health, so I work as a public health nurse for our local health department. I'm here today because I have worked in the past year or a couple years with military family services, specifically around mental health caregivers. So we often hear about caregiving. In the military, we have an understanding of what that looks like, but when you're typing that into a Google search engine, when you're accessing other medical services, then the resources tend to really be focused mainly on caregivers taking care of someone with a physical illness, and more as mental health and mental health promotion comes to the forefront, it's really important to have resources that promote that. So I worked with Military Family Services. They were instrumental in developing the mental health caregiver guide that I think some of you might have with you. So I'm here to talk about that today.
Yeah, perfect. So that's a great segue into, when you got here this morning, you had this lovely guide under your chair. Some of you may have picked it up. Some of you may have changed chairs. But if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I would say definitely do so. Julie, can you kind of tell us a little bit about maybe what you've learned about caregivers and maybe how some of these things apply to military caregiving?
Yeah. So pretty much everything that's in that book, we all learned from caregivers. I think the one really great thing about working in mental health is we really value working with people with lived experience, and that's not always the case in other avenues. So at the outset with this project, we conducted a lot of focus group, focus testing, and we're lucky in Ottawa because we have a really diverse population, but including a very strong representation of military families. So it was really great to sit down with people and to get a glimpse of what their unique needs were, and really what the resounding unanimous message was, apart from the fact that each caregiver's journey is so unique, was that the needs are quite different when you're looking at mental health challenges and mental illness. And specifically where that played out for military families was in that sometimes, let's say you have a spouse that's helping care for a member, she might also be providing care to a child or a youth experiencing mental health challenges, especially with things like transition, with anxiety, with stress. And so that was sort of the big starting point, if you will, and that sort of set the guide in motion. But mainly I learned that people are sort of an expert in their own journey, and that we really needed to develop a resource that not only had some really great basic information that people could sort of take home with them, but really a resource that was validating and spoke to someone in a very respectful, neutral, non-paternalistic tone. And I think that that's from all the feedback we've received, that was really something that was really important to us.
Yeah, I love that. I think Meg Cabot was supposed to be here with us this afternoon, who is the, I'm going to get the acronym wrong. She's the Caregiver Program Director for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. And they produce a lot of really great caregiver guides as well. A lot of them are kind of how-tos for some bureaucratic process things, which is also really important. But I love that yours works for everyone, regardless of whether or not it's their department or their specific question, because it's tools that really everyone, and probably most of y'all, can use. So can you tell us a little bit about some of these kind of take-home practical application things that are in here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we wanted to develop a resource that wasn't necessarily, so while we consulted with various priority POPs, it wasn't specifically targeted towards specific diagnostics or illnesses or specific populations. We developed an accompanying resource guide for our local health integration network. So that was sort of a separate product that provided some of that navigation around finances, housing, things like that, legal. But this caregiver guide, it's specifically meant for the caregiver themselves when they're caring for someone, and it does have a lifespan approach, so children, youth, adults, and older adults living with a mental illness or experiencing mental health challenges. It's essentially split up into two parts. The first part obviously being similar to that message that you get on a plane with regards to the oxygen mask. You know, you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of someone else. So the first part is really focused on caregivers and what can they do to best take care of themselves. And it does have practical tools. They're all evidence-informed. We're really lucky at Ottawa Public Health that we have a great partnership with our local children's hospital, as well as our local mental health hospital, various experts, and again, people with lived experience. Then the latter half of the guide is really focused on what does it look like caring for a child, youth, adult, or older adult living with mental illness or experiencing mental health challenges. And there's a really neat part in there too, where it's a strategy called staying strong. And in French, it's called rester tenace. The translation's really good for francophones in the room. And it's essentially these 5 things that you can look at in terms of, you know, your sleep, taking care of your health or taking your medications, owning it, doing something that you're passionate about, that you're good about, nutrition, and getting moving, getting out there.
Chips.
Chocolate chips.
Yeah, totally. Nutrition.
And you'll notice, you know, it's not public health centric in that it says, you know, food is fuel. You know, eat nutrient dense food. We weren't looking to, like I said, be paternalistic and give guidelines. We were basically looking for when you're waiting for services in the mental health sector. I find a lot of times people sort of sit at home and they're waiting for that specialist appointment in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and you're kind of just flailing in the meantime. So this is sort of this guide where here are some tangible things that you can work on, but essentially we all can work on them. So
Totally.
Meant to be practical and useful.
Yeah, I love it. That's really great. Linda Davis, I see you out there nodding. I know I've heard you tell caregivers to drink a glass of water and take a shower before they have a total breakdown. And I love, and grab a handful of chocolate chips while you're at it. So I love when there are action items, you know, where people can do something. So I think this is a really great tool, and I just really love it. Kari, your husband is co-captain of Team Canada. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. Well, how did y'all meet? How's your kind of relationship evolved?
Well, we were idealistic students at university.
Okay.
And this was in the immediate years after 9/11. So that's dating us a little bit as well. But we met at a conference, and we started this big, long argument about what Canada's approach should be to the war in Afghanistan and to international involvement and what role Canada should play. And this became quite a heated argument that carried on for several hours, which shows you what policy geeks we were at the time. But that argument continued on, and that argument continued on until we decided that we were going to argue for the rest of our lives.
Clearly. Funny story. When I met my now husband, this was high school physics, and we were bickering about the U.S. involvement in the Iraq War. So watch out who you argue with is obviously the lesson here. So, Kari, what are your thoughts on how to support military families? What works? What do you hear about what caregivers want?
Well, why don't I start with a little bit of a story of my experience?
We like stories.
Because when I got that call, you sort of go into an automatic mode. You are operating on autopilot, or at least I was. And so you go through the mechanics, you make the plans, you're very logical, you go from one step to another. What do you need? What is going to happen? What does that mean? And when Simon was repatriated from Landstuhl to Canada, he was in the hospital for about a month. And during that time, because while he had gone to Afghanistan, I was finishing my studies, and I was still living in Kingston, and he had already been posted to Quebec City. And so during that month while he was in hospital, I had to move from one province to another province. And that meant picking up all my stuff, driving a truck in the midst of the first snowstorm of the year, and then picking up his stuff, and then finding a house and moving in, and then coming back. And I managed to do this all with the help of friends and family in a 48-hour period, and coming back to the hospital, and he was saying, "Where were you? You were gone so long." And for him, it was, because, I mean, it was.
Yeah.
But so there were those immediate logical autopilot steps. Mm-hmm. And you push yourself and push yourself to make sure that you have the space ready for him to come home to. And so then this was right around Christmas. He was released from hospital around the 23rd of December because he wanted to be home for Christmas. And we had family over for Christmas. And then we had all the friends that wanted to come see Simon over for New Year's Eve. And I was making sushi on New Year's Eve for all these friends, and I burnt the sushi rice. And so I scraped it all out and put it in the garbage and tried again, and I burnt it a second time. And I scraped it all out. It just wasn't working. And the third time that it burnt, I dumped it directly into a large plastic garbage bag by this point. And of course, being hot rice, it just melted, and all the rice went all over the floor. And it was at that point that I just sat down on the floor and cried. And that was my breaking point of everything that had happened since the 16th of November to the 31st of December. And Simon wheeled his chair into the room, and he crawled down onto the floor with me, and he held me. And that we knew.
Okay,
we're
here now. Yeah.
We're here now. We're going to be okay. Or we're going to be able to move forward together. And so we moved on, and he went back to work, and I went back to work. And, as you move on with life, we didn't take a pause. We just kept on pushing, because we were scared that we would let what had happened to him. And I think that he was scared about what that would mean for his career.
Right, don't look
and
at it
for
too long. Yeah.
And for what that would mean for our plans of where we wanted to go and what we wanted to achieve. So we kept on pushing. And so then it was not until Simon got the call for the Invictus Games and said, "You're on the team." And he looked at me, he's like, "Honey, can we do this?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'm sure you can do this. You can do whatever you want." He's like, "What will I compete in?" It's like, "Well, I'm sure you'll find something." And so but I didn't put the connection together of what that meant in terms of what we had gone through and what we had been doing. And because we had been so focused that we had never really taken that time to reflect. And so then it was at the Invictus Games last year in Orlando that I met all of these incredible families that had similar experiences. There were shared experiences. And over the next year, I started talking to these families, writing up their stories, and really listening to what they had gone through and making great friends along the way. And I realized that really we weren't alone. There was a community there, and that we had each other to rely on. But I needed to know that community was there, and I just hadn't really put all the pieces together. And so I think some of the concrete tools that caregivers and that families in our particular case, of injured soldiers, is to know that there's that community out there, and that there are those resources out there. Because at the time that Simon was injured, there weren't as many resources as there are today. There's been a great development of the resources and the organizations that are really involved. But I think it took this event, the Invictus Games, and the activities that are surrounding it, to really realize that there are all these other resources out there, and that we can also lean on one another. And that, I think, is a practical tool, is just being able to reach out. And also to be able to take a break and eat chocolate.
And eat chocolate. It always comes back to that. Yeah, that was great. I think that really captures a lot of kind of the challenge and the potential of a lot of these roles. We hear a lot about isolation and that leading to that depression that one of the earlier presenters talked about. And so I think kind of you speaking to that community, I think that goes a long way to that. Scott, I haven't forgotten you. You have a little different perspective. Can you speak to maybe some of the pros and cons of looking at how you would kind of capture a family versus individuals, and really how we should approach that with this population?
Yeah, I think you're hearing loud and clear today that looking at the family as a unit, serving unit, is no longer a nice to have, but a necessity. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big believer in that. And as simple as that sounds, it's taken a while to get there. And clearly, there's different approaches to doing that. As some may be aware, in some countries like the U.S., they do treat that unit very much the same, where the serving member and the family have access to the exact same services through the same providers. Here in Canada, we have a separate system for the serving members, and that's the system that we support at Calian. And then the families rely on the public health services in the provinces wherever they're residing. So I think it's imperative that you look at whatever system you employ, how does that impact that family unit, and do it very deliberately so that you can identify any of the special impediments that may come with whatever that's. I'm not going to opine on what system's better. I don't really have the background to do that. I'm sure there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I think what's important is that you look at how the family engages with the system that you employ, and very deliberately come up with a list of unique challenges, and then systematically start to chip away. And I don't have a military background, my family doesn't, but I'm a big believer it takes a village. So when I joined Calian, there was a discussion around this program called Military Family Doctor Network, that we call it. And it was in the works, and it was building off of the good work of a group called Operation Family Doc in Ottawa, where basically they were trying to get to really one of the many unique challenges of being a military family. So what happens in Canada is, because there's a shortage of family doctors, you can end up going from waiting list to waiting list, and you go, as you make your way, you're just there, you're redeployed and put at the bottom of another list. So we were in a unique position, having worked with the military for pretty much 30 plus years of our existence. We run a group of clinics called Primacy, and these are about 150 clinics across the country located in Loblaw and Superstore locations. And we have a unique relationship with those clinicians, so we were able to leverage that relationship and get basically a front-of-the-line status, a program around front-of-the-line status, so that these families moving from place to place, and typically from base to base towns, could get a little help, and it'd be one less thing on that list of things to do when they're moving. And to me, that was just a no-brainer. So it was something that we had a unique opportunity, and so we just did it. And that, what I contributed was, I'm stubborn. I didn't want to wait around, so we just started, and we started to chip away. And by no means are we going to fix that issue, but I think that we're just slowly trying to contribute one family at a time. And where do we go from there? I don't know. There's challenges, and we've had discussions with a lot of people. Anybody that listens, frankly, because I'm in health, I think health is a great place to put an anchor in the ground. So, for example, as you're transitioning from the military, we've advocated for programs that, again, we're not reinventing the wheel. Other countries have used, where you put in place a program that much more deliberately connects that transitioning member to a family and a doctor in the community, and maybe there's incentives, maybe there's something that has to be there because it's not easy, right? There's a limited number of family doctors, as people well know. But by doing that, you kind of anchor that transition in something that I think is key, that family doctor who is the gateway to all the services that you may require. If you put a program in place that requires that physician to make sure they come back, so they engage initially and then they come back a year later or whatever makes sense. I think it's also an opportunity to make sure that you're just keeping track of people and how are they doing in their career transition, how are they doing with their finances, that all contribute to
Right, we like to think we can
physical
silo
and
these
mental
things,
health, right? So,
but that's not always the case.
So sometimes just finding one place to put an anchor in the ground and then build from there is...
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you've got a lot of good stuff there. A thing that I've found with the American system, I think we do a really good job in that acute phase when soldiers and families land in our big hospital centers. And then when we transition to the VA side, you usually move back to your home community. Well, what we've done is pull our families away from all their support system, whether that's just family practice, whether that's medical, whether that's more social structure, whether that's your church group or your friends or whoever, and you take them to a new place, and now they've kind of got to start back from the ground up in a pretty fragile place. And that can set up a lot of really troubling things. My current role is the director of the Warrior Family Support Center. The Returning Heroes Home is the nonprofit that works with the Warrior Family Support Center. We found that, and that's located on Fort Sam Houston, which is one of the primary care centers in the U.S., that 80% of our soldiers and families that transition there will stay in the San Antonio community. And I think that's a really big asset for us because we can maintain that continuum of care. After my husband was injured, he stayed on active duty because he also makes great life choices. And we moved to DC for him to be a congressional fellow and work on Capitol Hill for a couple years and in the Pentagon. And he retired from there, which created all manner of hilarious challenges. The VA thought he was transitioning in San Antonio. So probably 6 weeks before his retirement date, we get this phone call that's like, "You've missed all your appointments in San Antonio." And we were like, well, we live in Virginia, so yes, we did. And then we ended up with a bunch of Saturday VA appointments. So kudos VA for scheduling Saturday appointments, but also not how I would choose to spend all of my Saturdays in December. But I think that kind of captures some of the importance of community and as a tool against that isolation that we've seen that can be very troubling, that I do think is contributing to the depression rates that we're really just starting to get a handle on. Open question, help yourselves. What else have you seen, peer-to-peer support, anything else that you really feel like is working to combat some of these challenges, either in your personal or professional capacity?
I mean, I'd say with my work with the Mental Health Caregiver Guide, you're absolutely right in what you said in terms of, we know that social connectedness is such a protective factor. And I think one of the downfalls of, high-tech society is we're sort of losing that. So I absolutely agree with you. The other thing that I heard a lot when we were developing the guide is that and I mean rightfully so, but there is an over-reliance on caregivers to help care for a loved one or a family member or a neighbor or a friend. And while the support groups or the services are great and those connections are wonderful, they're just an hour or a few in a 24-hour, 365 job. And so what we heard from caregivers is that they just felt that they needed their experience validated, and they sort of needed to be reminded of what they actually have control over. Because what we heard is that the journey is very much one that when the person that you're caring for is doing well, then you're doing well. Your mental health's good, you're feeling good. Then crisis happens and now you're in crisis. And so one of the speakers this morning spoke about it's as simple as having a plan. And we actually have a chart in here where, make a plan for who in your neighborhood can walk your dog. Who can you give an extra key to? It's these small things that in the cumulative big picture really help provide a protective factor for when things don't go well. And it does, in a way, sort of challenge you to get more connected with people around you, to get more support. But then it also has a section, like I alluded to, the Staying Strong piece, where we do focus on relationships, which, you know, how do you maintain your relationship with your child and your spouse? How do you maintain your relationship with yourself? How do you take stock of how you're doing? And so for me, it's really about empowering people. There is a lot of stuff that we can all do when we're caring for someone. And you know, the experts are great and the peers are great, but it's also hard when it's just us and that person. And that's where there is a lot of power that we all have. And I think we really need to honor that, because that's where, you know, that's where so much of the good stuff happens.
Yeah, I think you tapped into a couple neat things there. We know, I've read, at least from my interpretation of the data, that a supportive family member is one of the best things we can do to bring about successful recovery and transition. That said, that's kind of a lot to put on a person, you know? Like, no big deal, but you're the most important factor to this whole thing. And you're like, oh, great, good. And I heard Mason say, and apparently was impressed enough to write it down this morning, that the juggling and the navigating of the white noise really can wear on a person. You know, and I think when we're talking about burnout, one of the things, my job in Virginia was with a foundation that worked with supporting caregivers, and one of the things that they would tell me most consistently was just wearing them down was consistently being told, oh, that's not my problem. No, I can't help you with that, but someone can. You know, and just this frustration of trying to figure out, like you said, everything from who is going to walk this dog, or in my case, this crazy puppy, you know, but also I need to get this medication refilled, but that pharmacy is only open on this day, and somebody else has an appointment, maybe a minor child, somewhere else across town, and you're trying to figure out, how do I kind of prioritize all of these things? And that can be really daunting. You mentioned technology taking away from personal interaction and social connection. Anyone want to take the counter and say technology has opened up connection? Kari?
I think that I would say that some of the resources that have been developed here in Canada around the military bases, that each military base, for example, has their own Facebook group, that has really helped to share some of those resources, like putting up your hand and saying, okay, I need, in Quebec City, for example, I need a psychologist, or I need somebody that I can talk to, a counselor that speaks English, because I can't express myself and speak French at the same time, in the second language. I know that there's been some cases that has sort of come up. So like sharing some of those resources has been really helpful online, that you have this sort of group that you can just sort of message somebody at the point of a button. And again, we come together at the family centers as well. So there is that physical and community connection.
Still real life connection.
Still real life connection, but also that community can continue online. So it's both physical and social. One of the things that I would say, following up on that, is a tool that would really be helpful, is that following up. Is because there's the crisis care, and there's the crisis care, the acute stage. But then moving on, 5.
What is
8,
the sustainability plan?
What is the sustainability? So where does that go from there? And is somebody checking in every so often? Is Veterans Affairs, or is there somebody there that's sort of following a case at some point that says, oh, well, this person hasn't been, or this family hasn't been in touch for a while. Maybe we should check in and just make sure that, you know, everything's going okay.
No, I totally agree. One of the best programs that I've worked with in my personal experience is the Federal Recovery Coordinator Program. In the U.S., they can span the DoD to the VA. And thank goodness for that, because I don't always know which program everything falls under. Apparently Larkin's wheelchair falls under VA, but this other benefit falls under DoD, and I cannot keep up with these things. And a lot of them do have very finite deadlines. You have 60 days to apply for this, or you have 2 years where you're still eligible for this. And our FRC has been on it and reaching out and saying, hey, Larkin and Rachel, move it. Your paperwork is due. And we're like, right, yeah, okay, we got it. You know, but if we didn't have that kind of one anchor point, Scott, like we were talking about, who gives us current, relevant information, right? I think those things are both critical when you're talking about information as a tool. Scott, anything else you want to add maybe on the technology or something else that's come to mind in the conversation?
I'm pro-technology.
You're pro,
so I'm
all right.
biased.
I'm not anti. I'm not anti.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pick on you. I just thought that was an
pro-people
interesting.
Too, but no, I think so. A place like Canada, we got so far to go in terms of leveraging technology in healthcare generally, and specifically for military families. I can envision. So for example, if you have a young child suffering from anxiety who's in a great relationship, making progress, and that family is going to get redeployed. There's technology there that you can maintain that relationship and smooth that transition no matter where you go. All we got to do is leverage this one single payer that we have here in Canada, but then we chopped it all up into a bunch of provinces. But I
don't know anything about that.
Where there's a will, there's a way to, and I think it's a great example that transition should be as smooth as possible, and technology can facilitate that. We just need to get out of the way, and I think that's a great way that we can leverage technology, and it's already out there.
That's true. I think when we're talking about technology, it is important to consider it's coming, and so we can either use it well, or we can deal with the problems that it causes. In my experience, ladies, anything y'all want to add in closing before we wrap it up? Did we miss anything?
Thank you to all the caregivers in the room.
Oh.
I know caregiving affects most of us, so it's a hard job.
Kari, did you want to add
And thank you for the great resources that bring us all together here so that we can have these discussions and that we can have these interactions in person without technology.
Although we may be live streaming.
That is true too.
No, I think the final kind of closing thought there from Julie, I think most of us will experience caregiving in some form or in some capacity in our lifetime, either with a parent or a child or a friend. And I think it's easy to kind of compartmentalize and say military caregivers have this unique experience and set it apart, when maybe there's an opportunity to see some common ground and say, oh, I had a similar challenge with this, that, or the other, and kind of find that empathy that we were talking about earlier. And then I guess kind of my final thought, and I think it taps into something a little bit that you were talking into. I heard someone say not too long ago, drink water, drive on, was one of their favorite sayings, which is not to be confused with Mason's suck it up buttercup, which is just mean. I think the kind of drink water part captures that. Give yourself permission. Drink water, take stock, let's absorb. Where are we? How did we get here? Let's make a new plan. And then that kind of segues into the drive on. I think caregiving can be so responsive because you're just dealing with things as they present themselves. And I think I like that drive has some kind of independence to it. My hope would be that most, if not all, caregivers can get to that point where you're in the driver's seat, as much obviously as is reasonably possible. So we're a little bit over time. Thank y'all. You've been a wonderful audience, and thank you to our panelists. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I attend a lot of conferences in my work, and I don't know about you, but one of the things that's impressed me is just how genuine so many of the people are here today that we've talked to. They've obviously been through a lot of pain, a lot of transition themselves, but they're very in touch with who they are now and what they want from life. So our final panel for the day is going to return to this issue of transition from military to civilian life, a question key to so many, and maybe at some point there's a level of denial that happens in the military, that you don't imagine that you have to transition to a civilian life, but inevitably that time comes. So this panel is moderated by the Office of the Veterans Ombudsman here in Canada. So please join me in welcoming Sharon to the stage and her panel.
So Sharon, where do we sit? Anywhere? How many? Okay.
Where do you want to sit?
So I can see everyone.
Okay.
Lost in space.
There we go. Well, here we are, the last panel of the symposium. And I don't know about you, but I've been inspired beyond words. Don't you agree? And I have to thank Bronwyn and TPL for offering us this wonderful opportunity because it is indeed inspirational. So as Kevin said, I'm the Deputy Ombudsman for Veterans in Canada, and we often get phone calls from veterans who are struggling with transition. And what our office does is an independent organization. We provide information, referrals, and we also intervene on behalf of veterans with their issues with the Department of Veterans Affairs. And we also try to look at systemic issues or find problems that could help a lot of veterans if resolved. So that's what we do. And so now it's time to meet your wonderful panel. And they have great experiences from both the lived experience as well as from research as well as programming. So Carrie, why don't we start with you and go down the line and explain a little bit about your expertise and what you do.
Okay. Bonjour, je m'appelle Carrie. Je suis... don't laugh. No.
Is that it?
No. Je suis l'épouse du général Vance, chef d'état-major de force canadienne, et je suis un vétéran. So,
U.S. veteran. U.S.
yes.
veteran.
So I was a veteran, so now I speak English. I do work for Canada Company, but I'm not here in that capacity. I'm here as the spouse of the CDFs. I served in the U.S. Army on active duty for 25 years. I just retired in 2015. We are a blended family. I raised 4 daughters while I served in the military. They are now, but I'm the mom of, we have 5 daughters. So we have our youngest is from my husband's first marriage. She's 13, and then I brought 4 to the relationship. Talk about baggage, and they are 14, 17, 17, and 20, and we have 5 girls. So I'm here to share, just kind of bring a message, and also to share both sides of being both a military spouse, I've been one for over 30 years, and also a veteran.
Excellent. Kathy.
I'm Catherine Linford, and I applaud you for your French because I can't do it. But I am a spouse. Chris is my partner, 33 years, and we have created a program that has helped couples overcoming PTSD. We've got 3 kids, and I'm here as both a spouse and a program coordinator.
I'm Chris Linford. I am the not better half of Catherine. We have been married for quite a while, and it's been great. I'm a veteran of 33 years in the Canadian Armed Forces. I also have post-traumatic stress disorder. I was diagnosed in 2004, but I've had it since 1994 upon my deployment to Rwanda. And I spent 10 years hiding it, or what I thought was hiding it. I just ended up spending 10 years damaging my family. And we have come a long way as a family, for sure, and it's still a work in process, especially with our three kids, one of which is still in the military and one has since left. So despite whatever I did, they decided to join the military, which was kind of ironic. But we're fully up and involved in what is our new purpose now, and that is running the COPE program, and that's, as Catherine says, the Couples Overcoming PTSD Every Day. We've been running that program now as part of our purpose in life. I always thought my purpose was to serve in the Canadian Armed Forces as a health services officer and first as a nurse, but I actually have since realized in doing this new work that what I'm doing now is my purpose, and I had to serve those years to prepare me to do this purpose. So it feels really good to be full up in a new and really exciting project that we've been running for 2.5 years now, and we just recently delivered it for the first time in French.
Excellent.
It's me.
Good job. Great socks, too.
Thank you. Those are Cope
yeah.
socks.
Oh,
They say Cope right across the
Oh,
top.
good.
And
That's
that is the lizard, which represents my limbic brain.
oh.
Or the
Very
lizard
good.
brain, which we talk a lot about on Cope.
That's right. Terry.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Terry Tennelian, and I'm a behavioral scientist at the RAND Corporation, which is a company based in the United States that is a nonprofit research organization. For about the past 18 years, I've been working on studies that look at the effects of military service and deployment in particular on service members, veterans, and their families. I have completed several studies that have looked specifically at the scale and scope of PTSD and traumatic brain injury in the United States and tried to understand how our system within the US is set up to address these particular conditions and to make recommendations on how to improve it. I've also had the great opportunity to study our military families as they face the challenges of military service across deployment as well as across the transition into civilian and veteran status. And I've been able to conduct a number of studies looking specifically at the challenges that our military caregivers face in supporting their loved ones in their recovery journey. So I'm pleased to be here, and I'm also the daughter of a veteran, and so I'm really pleased to be among a very large military family.
Excellent. Good. Linda.
My name is Linda Davis, and I'm between you and those chocolate chips. So I'll share quickly. I thank you, Chris, for what you're sharing about the untreated PTS. And I'm a soldier, former soldier, but soldier for life, the mother of a soldier. I'm currently caring for 4 different people who are all military connected in some way. And I went for decades not treating my PTS. And high functioning is not what all it's cracked up to be, because eventually you do crack. But the opportunity I have now, having once served early on in the Iran-Iraq war for President George Bush and creating that program Rachel referred to, the Federal Recovery Coordination Program. Now I'm able to serve our current president. As I said, I would serve any president who lets me serve our veterans. But under this president, I'm in the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I'm the Chief Veteran Experience Officer. So I am responsible for customer satisfaction for our veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors. And we are doing that at the VA by deploying all of the best practices and lessons learned in the corporate arena in companies that are effective, such as USAA and Disney. And we're trying to bring those into our customer services in support of that veteran inclusive, and that's how we talk about it now. Thank you.
It's a great title, isn't it? Chief Veteran Experience Officer. I like that.
It's better than being in charge of United Airlines.
That's right. That's
Although
right.
some days.
True. Well, just a couple of quick facts, just in the Canadian context pertaining to transition. And there's a little infographic up there, and I know there's one in your package when you leave as well. And interestingly enough, most military members do transition rather easily. But approximately a third have great difficulty, and it's even higher percentage for those that are medically released. And interestingly, too, of those, they claim that 28% of their spouses have difficulty with transition, and about 17% of their children have difficulty with transition. And our office tried to do a little bit of a study on medically releasing military members who were transitioning, and interestingly enough, we could not find a single universally accepted definition of what a successful transition was. So then we teamed up with SIMVR, and we interviewed medically releasing members who self-declared as having successfully transitioned. And we heard some great stories. For example, we found, not surprisingly, that spouses or a supportive family member was the most important thing to a successful transition. We heard things like, during transition, everything was slipping through my fingers, and my wife was catching it for me. And if I had been better advised, I would have had my spouse attend more programs and help me with my transition. And on the flip side of that was also that they were most worried about their families, whether it was providing finances and financial security for their family or being able to maintain that family unit and family life. So that's a bit of a background from the Canadian context. And now we're going to go back to our panel with a one-word question, or answer, I should say. So, in one word, a family in transition is blank. So, a family in transition is?
Apprehensive.
Apprehensive.
For me, it was chaotic.
Chris?
Troubled.
Disrupted.
Often lost.
And interestingly, we did a Twitter chat with Canadian families on this very question, and what we heard was overwhelmed and stressed. So that's what the feelings were. So then how do we move from that to the new normal? And now we have some questions for the panel to find out what some of the supports were, or what are some ways to help people go from that feeling of being overwhelmed and stressed to a new normal and way of being. So why don't we start off with Terry? And with all your good work at RAND Corporation and the research that you've done, what did you find were the most important factors to help families through this transition?
Sure. Thank you for that question. And we find different things for different populations. So I'm going to talk today really about our work with military caregivers. Colonel Howe mentioned this morning that we had the opportunity to do a very large assessment in the United States to look at the needs of our 5.5 million caregivers who were supporting loved ones who previously had served in the armed forces. The 1.1 million of those individuals who were supporting post-9/11 veterans were at increased risk for depression. 40% of them met symptom criteria for major depressive disorder. So that was really quite alarming. They also expressed high rates of feelings of social isolation, and because many of them were in the workforce, they were also having to really adjust their work schedules. And so when we were looking at the landscape of supports and policies and programs in the U.S. to really help these individuals with these challenges, one of the things that we observed is that most of the programs that were designed to support caregivers really weren't tailored to caregivers. They were actually tailored to the wounded warrior, or that veteran, and saw the caregiver as an incidental population that was served as well. Sure, caregivers were invited to attend retreats, but the retreat content wasn't necessarily designed for the specific caregiver. So what we found across all of these different analyses is that caregivers really need to have access to effective, efficient programs. That is, programs that work, that deliver high-quality services to address their needs, as well as equipping them with the skills to ensure that they can help their veteran and their loved one. But we also know that they need to have supportive environments. So for those that are in the workplace, they need to have employers and policies and programs in the workplace that will support them to allow flexible schedules, to perhaps have employee assistance programs, nurse care managers that can answer phone calls in the middle of the night. They also need to have access to supportive healthcare environments. So they need to be part of the care team. They need to be listened to by our healthcare providers. And they are usually the honest broker. They are the one who can say whether or not the veteran is taking their medication as prescribed, or whether or not they're showing up to their appointments. And so they really need to be included in that transition, or that care team, and part of the healthcare and kind of provider community, if you will. And in the U.S., that's not always guaranteed. And so there can be some bureaucratic reasons why they may not be engaged in that care. So the supportive work environment, the supportive healthcare environment were really quite critical. But also we found that they needed to be empowered. And so they needed to know that they were not alone, that they had shared experiences with other caregivers. And so being able to connect to other caregivers, to share stories, share resources, advice, words of wisdom, whether it be on, over online platforms or in-person kind of support groups, that connection was really, really quite critical and important.
Thank you, and that's very much what we heard earlier from our previous panel and others today, so it really resonates very well. So Linda, in your current role at the VA, what programs and services have you found that are the most important and valuable for families in transition? And as well, I know what we also heard today was a lot that people have a hard time knowing about that the programs are actually there. So how do you ensure that people can access these programs as well?
That's a very good question, and thank you for the opportunity to share it. So when I look at the question of transition, in the United States, we typically define that as that space maybe a year before you leave active duty military and the time in which you're being enrolled in the VA. And we require you to take a 2-week class if you're in uniform, and now we invite the spouse in. That's considered the transition period. That is not what we consider that transition period. In the Department of Veterans Affairs, some of the corporate tools we've been using is journey mapping, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that. You can't see this, but if you send me an email, I will give it to you online. Now, the point of this is built by talking to veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors, is to show us that, in fact, transitions happen across your lifetime. And they happen from the point of accession, when you raise your right hand, to the point at which you're memorialized. And that's the point at which we inter our loved ones who have served. And then, in fact, if you're a survivor, your transitions keep happening the rest of your life. So in these points that matter, and you'll see things like getting out, including you'll see things like injuries and illness. We identify the moments that matters to the individual. And the framework that we're trying to use is ensure what Rachel alluded to, that you have always the service member or veteran, the family, the caregiver, and the survivor at the center of everything we do. It's about them telling us at what point in time what they need. Then it's about us to provide them. So a couple of the quick ways that we are working on providing them. We do everything in my office from having statisticians to social workers, and we look at basically every way in which we can listen to the voice of the veteran, family, caregiver, and survivor, and the way we can then take that information and feed it back to improve our services, which in turn improve their experiences. We have over 1,000 call centers that we're responsible now for modernizing. We have thousands of websites. We use the National Resource Directory, which is like a yellow book for resources in the community, searchable by zip code. We are using the journey maps, but we're also doing some very specific tools. First of all, of course, it's essential to make sure that anyone who is in crisis has the ability to get services. So you naturally have what you do too, is the crisis lines. Once those are functioning, we also have a hotline under my office, and that's connected to the White House. And that says any of those individuals, veterans, et cetera, who have a need or a complaint or a concern or a suggestion, you can call a particular number, and October 1st, that's 24/7 live answer. All that information gets fed back into leadership and program managers to change the way they're delivering the services. We also then go to the case management, as Rachel was alluding to. And one of the things that we're tackling is a new initiative to ensure that no veteran, whether they're challenged with the chronic illnesses of aging or whether they're disabled because of a severe combat injury, that they don't ever have to be institutionalized. So we're doing a big Choose Home initiative to make sure people are supported at home. That means they have to have all the community resources, and how you find those is a great challenge. So I have a series of things I'd like to share with you, including the map, including the lines and phone calls and messages and websites. And so if you send me an email, lynda.davis@va.gov, and you just say, in the header, you just say, Canada, send resources. I will send them all to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Chris, you lived the experience of transition, and we often hear the adage that when the member serves, the family serves. And I know the program that you've developed doesn't just focus on the veteran, but it focuses on couples and the family. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. The reason why we developed the program in the first place is because as I was on my journey and recovering from PTSD, it became very clear to me at about the 18-year mark of having PTSD, I'm a bit of a slow learner, that I had actually impacted my family quite significantly. I somehow suppressed that for most of those years. PTSD, as we all know, can be quite an isolating injury in the first place, and you can spend a lot of your day staring at your own belly button when you have PTSD. So that's what I was doing for quite a while and refused to even think that it might be affecting my family. So when we started talking about developing a program on the heels of a cross-country speaking tour that Catherine and I did after I published my book,
Right.
we were confronted by military and first responder families across the country saying, holy cow, when we hear your story, how did you even stay together? And that really got us thinking, how did we stay together? So we started to examine the strategies that we used, sometimes not even knowingly used, including the ones we screwed up pretty bad as well, and talked to some really gifted trauma therapists who agreed to help us develop the clinical model to become COPE. So one of the interesting things that happens in the very first day of COPE is the spouses that come with their veteran partner with PTSD discover that the COPE is just as much about them as it is about the veteran with PTSD. And it's quite a shock for them because they've never experienced that before. It's like, oh my God, this is about me too. And we also introduce a new language that we have them think about PTSD as their injury rather than his or her. And that really resonates with them. Like, you can see it actually strike a tone with them. They go, okay, that's why I feel like this. I'm injured too. And they start to talk about it from that perspective, the remainder of the retreat, as well as the 6-month follow-up piece of COPE, where they are learning to tackle this injury as a team. And they become actually force multipliers for each other. 1 + 1 is not 2, 1 + 1 is 3. You can be stronger than the sum of your parts when you are battling this injury. And we actually even tempt them with that if they do use these tools for the rest of their life, they can actually achieve better health than before they had PTSD.
That's exciting, isn't it? Very good. Now, Catherine, you had the lived experience too, but being as a supportive spouse through this transition. And I know throughout the day today, starting with Dave this morning, we heard that it was kind of difficult from time to time for the spouse because you're the spouse of or the husband of, and it was really hard to find time to do something productive for yourself. So my question to you is, how did you deal with this transition and especially finding time for yourself? And was COPE part of that for you as well?
Yeah, initially I did not handle the transition well because the military was a part of my family. It was who we were. In that transition is when we developed this program or talked about the program, and it really gave me a sense of family again. It gave me some hope. It gave me some language that I was missing. I didn't understand. It gave me my spouse back because at that point we had really drifted and we weren't on the same page anymore. So it really gave us back. So it was a long transition, but it was worth it. And yes, the COPE program has opened my eyes, and I do it now. Well, I guess I did it from the beginning for other spouses. I now do it for myself because I know now that it is helped and has healed me a lot.
It's come full circle for you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent work. So Carrie, you are currently the Chief of Defense Staff's wife. As you mentioned, you also served many years in the U.S. military. So you've lived the experience too for many ways and experienced it with many different people in many different scenarios. So what do you think are the most important factors or things that we could do to help veterans and their families in the transition?
Well, I did homework. So I'm a lawyer and I write and I'm always, first of all, it's very heartening to see that the greatest source of support is the spouse. And so I think the key is to take care of spouses but take care of them, spouses and partners, before they start the post-transition life. Get them prepared, and not only have them be prepared, but they have to feel like they're prepared. Because when I talked about, it's a lot of this, in my opinion, it's about feelings. So they have to feel prepared and look at this as a new journey. And you know, my husband and the government of Canada are committed to military families. We saw that in the defense policy. And so they're developing a comprehensive family program that will help with addressing the challenges that military families face. So not only the issues of mobility and the challenges associated with those, but also trying to maintain a high quality of life. Because we've heard on this panel, you know, it's so hard. You're moving all the time, and I think the healthcare is a really big issue. And I'll tell you, there's going to be the creation of a Canadian Forces transition group. And what this is going to do is it's going to augment, and here's a really great word, and it will do this, not if it does this, it's going to professionalize transition services. And that's what needs to happen. And there will be an additional focus, though, on the ill and injured in this group. So seeing this, it has, and if anybody knows my husband or heard my husband speak, he is a no-nonsense, it's going to happen. So I'm very confident. Of course, I'm biased, but I'm very confident in this. And this is such a big step. And I just want to say that having been in the U.S. military and now being associated with or a Canadian military family, we each do things well. I can't say that in Canada this is done better, we do it better in Canada, or we do it better in the U.S. But what I've seen since being the spouse of CDS is the partnership, and we're learning from each other. So for me, it's really great that you have, I get a little verklempt by this, but that you have members of the associated with the U.S. forces and veterans here, so we can share, and that's really a wonderful thing. So thank you.
So we talked a bit at the starting point about the feelings of what it felt like to be in transition. Then we've just talked about some supports and different ways we can tackle transition. And now for our final question, what about the future? Today we have some policymakers from different levels of government and different governments here. We have not-for-profit organizations and sponsors. And so I think it's really important that they hear from our panel as to the future. For families in transition, wouldn't it be great if blank and a short why? Why don't we start again with you? Oh. Yes, since you're on this end, we started down there last time.
Well, wouldn't it be great if military families were prepared and felt prepared and excited to go on this, look at this new life as a new journey and be excited about it?
Wouldn't it be great if the spouses had more information prior to the transition and were part of the process, and like have a COPE-like program where they are learn to support one another in that transition?
Absolutely.
Wouldn't it be great if all of these significant resources that work in this space and do such great work, many independent of each other, if we could all just get on the same page and maximize and leverage each other so that we could beat down stigma surrounding this injury, and which would provide people permission and courage to be able to step forward and ask for the help they need and deserve.
So you stole my answer because it was so good. Now I have to come up with a new one. But I think, wouldn't it be great if military families and veterans in transition felt empowered that they could optimize their health, their well-being, their lives, and just thrive?
Absolutely.
And
following on from Terry's, wouldn't it be great if military families, veterans, and their caregivers and survivors in transition, their whole life, felt that they had access to the resources and support that they needed, whether it was care or benefits or social services, at home in their community, in facilities, whether it's private or public, that there were absolutely no barriers. And essentially, we were all able to deliver that to them as if we were Amazon Prime.
Ooh.
Amazon Prime.
Good. Excellent. So that's a challenge to each and every one of you and a rallying cry for, I think those were absolutely wonderful what ifs. And I think it's up to all of us to try to make those what ifs our future. Is there anything else you'd like to add or say on the topic, the panel, before we close?
I would just like to say a quick comment, if I might.
Sure.
I would like to say two things. First of all, I would like to publicly thank my wife, Catherine, for her support through my recovery in PTSD. And it means a great deal to me, obviously. And I feel privileged to have you at my side. And I'd also like to thank TPL, who helped to partially fund our very first French delivery of COPE program, along with Wounded Warriors Canada. It's nice to see those two big hitters in Canada as charitable organizations group together, actually join together, shoulder to shoulder, and fund a program like ours. And we feel privileged that we were the target of that money. Thank you, TPL.
So I'd like to thank our expert panel today for their sharing their stories and their knowledge. I know I learned a lot, and I hope that you in the audience also had a few takeaways to help you in your role, or perhaps those that you know who are in transition or about to transition. And thank you very much. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we don't. But before we close, I just also want to thank Bronwyn and TPL again for this amazing experience. It's unparalleled. It has been wonderful. And thank you very much for that. And thank you to all of you for all that you do for everyone, the veterans and everyone else in your lives. Thank you so much. And to close, I just wanted to say one thing. It sort of hit me. A really simple takeaway for me is that the same characteristics that result in a successful transition, that having the support of a family member or a family, and having a purpose or a plan for the way ahead, are exactly what the Invictus Games are all about. The support of a family, and the saying that I am the master of my fate. So what a beautiful marriage. So thank you all.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. And, I'd like to be able to point to one moment in the day that just inspired me, but there were so many of them. And we had great speakers, great panelists, and I really do appreciate that people have come from far and taken time out of their busy schedules to be here. And I'd especially like to thank our military and veteran families for their time and also for trusting us with their stories. The good news is that everybody will have a full recap of the day because PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of our wonderful sponsors, is putting together a report that will capture the key themes, which we will send out to everybody, so you can look forward to receiving that. And I'd like to thank our other sponsors, so Scotiabank, and especially Carolyn Bell-Ritchie at Scotia, who has just been fantastic through this whole thing and our inside champion for Scotia. So really want to thank her. Johnson & Johnson, Callion, Fisher House, Sage, Moores, 100 Women in Finance, and Project Sunshine, who, if you don't have children, you may not know, but they have been looking after some children upstairs. So we really do appreciate that, and we thought that was an important aspect, given that we were inviting families to come. I would also like to thank Kevin Newman, who did an absolutely outstanding job. He did our very first symposium and did a great job there too, but let's give him a big hand. And I'd like to thank my team at TPL, who there's so much work that goes into this. And this is one of the things we do. It's not exactly our core business, but I think they did an absolutely fantastic job. And I'd like to recognize Namita, who I think you've all had a chance to email with. And yeah. She's really stepped up and put in, and you may know she's actually in charge of our disbursements and making recommendations, evaluating all the applications that come. So this is her part-time job, this symposium. So thank you. And I'd also like to recognize our good friends at Citizen Relations who have been with us since the very, very, very beginning, and they produce all of our events, and you know, it's so great because I never have to worry. We just show up, and I know it's all going to be perfect. So thank you very, very much. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over the torch to Australia. And I'd also like to recognize, I don't think it's been mentioned, but the Honourable Daniel Tehan, Minister for Veterans Affairs from Australia, has been with us today. So it's been really wonderful having him here. And now I'd like to introduce Peter Lay, who's just going to say a few quick words. Peter Lay retired from the Army in July 2008 after 37 years of service. Peter concluded his career in the Army with the rank of Lieutenant General in the appointment of the Chief of Army, a position he served in for 6 years. Since leaving the Army, Peter has joined the University of Canberra as a professor and foundation director of the National Security Institute. He is the chairman of the Australian International Military Games, which will run the Invictus Games in Australia in 2018. Please welcome Peter.
Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you a little bit of Australia, so I have to start by saying g'day. It's a little bit of Australia because you got a very good bit of Australia earlier today from Mark and Karen. So thank you to Mark and Karen for representing what they're doing so well down in South Australia, but also a view of Australia. Really, I'm here to do just a couple of things. And one of the things I learned in those 37 years is don't get between soldiers and morning tea. And I think it's probably don't get between a seminar and perhaps a nice Chardonnay or something outside. But I wanted to say thank you to TPL, to Bronwyn, to all the participants, to all the speakers. I've learned an enormous amount. I'm also involved with a charity called Soldier On in Australia, and the sorts of things that I've heard here today are very many things that I'll be taking back because I think you're showing real leadership here, thought leadership, but also emotional and moral leadership. And it's wonderful to come to another country, a country that we are allied with and we've fought with. And over these few years now, we're commemorating 100 years of fighting with Canadians, and we're still on the field of battle today. So I feel at home. So thank you to everybody for that thought, emotional and moral leadership. But really what I wanted to do is say, come on down under in 2018. And to perhaps give you a little bit of a taste, I'm going to show you a video. We're a little bit early. We're going to have the Toronto Games first, and they're going to be great. Then we're going to have the Australian Games, and they're going to be great also. We'll leave the competition for the field of volleyball, basketball, but we'll have just as great a games as you will. So I'm going to run a little video, then I'm going to say a few words again, and then I'm going to invite the Honourable Dan Tehan to come and talk about what the Australian Government has in view for Invictus and a seminar just like this. So can we have the video, please? So it is game on down under, and from where we sit, down under spelt the right way. You've just got it the wrong way around up here. We've learned a lot. I've got an observer team here. We're going to learn a lot more. You'll see the similar pattern in the games, but what will Sydney in October of 2018 give you that might be a little bit different? Yachting on Sydney Harbour with the backdrop of the Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge. If you come on down, you can walk up the Sydney Harbour Bridge and get one of the best views that you could ever imagine in the world. You can cuddle a koala, and we're going to make sure that we get a hold of all the snakes and nasty critters and spiders and things that we've got down there, and we'll tell them, don't touch the Canadians. You can go for the Americans, just don't touch the Canadians. I'm working on Prince Harry on a surfboard at Bondi Beach, and for those who want to do some linguistic research, we have a phrase down home called budgie smugglers. You mightn't know what that is, look it up, and I reckon I can get Harry and budgie smugglers. And yes, we do have chocolate chips, so you can come to Australia for that. We'd very much like to welcome you down under in 2018 and to give you a sense of what the Australian government is doing, and they're doing an enormous amount of supporting the Invictus Games. I'd like to introduce the Minister for both Veterans Affairs but also for Defence Personnel, the Honourable Dan Tehan.
Thanks, Peter, and can I say I've agreed with everything that you've said, apart from the fact that we need to see Prince Harry in budgie smugglers. I think that might be too much for Australia to handle. So can I say what a privilege and an honour it is to be here with you, and can I thank the organisers, TPL, for the seminar that or the symposium that they've put on today. Can I tell you that Australia wants to continue with this theme, and so we want to run a symposium which will build on what you've done today. And as a matter of fact, it's going to build on the last session in particular, because we are focusing heavily as a government on transition at the moment. We want to continue to improve and modernise what we're doing in the transition space. And the discussion that was part of that last dialogue, where what would the future look like, and in particular that what if or what would I wish for, that's what we'd like to continue to build on, because we want to bring the 18 nations who will be coming to the Games together. We want to hear from as many of those 18 nations as possible as to what they're doing in transition, what best practice looks like in their country, and therefore we will be able to really learn as to what works in particular, because none of us have the answer or the complete answer in this area. We've all got to learn from each other. As Peter mentioned, we fight together. What we've got to do also is learn together. And if we can do that, I'm sure that every one of our countries will be better for it. I met with the Canadian Veterans Affairs Minister earlier today, and we've agreed that we want to start doing research together, and we want to bring other countries in as well to do that research, because we know that we can all learn from each other, and if we're prepared especially to put the dollars in, we know that that learning will happen quicker than what it is at the moment, and we'll get even better results. So we will have a symposium. It will be on transition, and I would invite every one of you to come along. As Peter has shown through the video and his warm welcome, Sydney will be something special. And I know that Prince Harry will get on a surfboard, and I'll give you a little tidbit, because I know this because my father played a part in it. his father, Prince Charles, has been on water skis in Australia. So it should be easy for Prince Harry to get on a surfboard. The other things that we will have 10 adaptive sports right across Sydney. The weather, when we're holding it, will be spectacular. Sydney doesn't need any selling, it sells itself. So you shouldn't need any excuses not to get there. I've already met some of the Canadian volunteers who are out there in their yellow T-shirts helping our athletes practice. And they are warm, they are friendly, they are professional with how they're going about it. And you can be rest assured, in Australia we will have a similar approach. We will have volunteers out there to welcome you and make sure that you have a very, very special time, as I have no doubt we will over the next week here in Toronto. So I look forward to having and welcoming as many of you who can make it next year. It's going to be fantastic. Peter is doing a wonderful job with the organising. The Australian government, through our Defence Department and our Veterans Affairs Department, is right behind the Invictus Games. We want to make sure that not only our athletes have a wonderful time and build themselves into even better people and more inspirational people, but we also want to make sure that our nations learn from the experience as well. So we're always there to help and support our defence personnel and our veterans. So thank you for giving me the opportunity just to say a few words. Good luck for the rest of this week. Good luck for the wonderful work that you do on behalf of our veterans and our serving defence personnel. It is incredibly important. What we've done together over a century has made this world a better place, and we've got to continue to do so. So, Peter, I'll hand back to you, and thanks very much for the opportunity of saying a few words. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Minister. Well, there's nothing else to say except enjoy the games. And I think Jen gave everybody instructions about the reception. If you have any questions, just feel free to ask one of the TPL staff and they can let you know. And all the best to Australia. We're really, really looking forward to next year. And we look forward to hearing more about the symposium. Thank you.